I shared. All right, so I'm going to call us to order. I will be off camera today. I'm not feeling well, but I have the pleasure of kicking us off with Dan, which means I don't have to talk much. And sorry again for not, being fully present. But I won't delay us any further since we're a couple minutes behind. And then I'll kick it to you.
All right, thank you. Give me 1 second. No, that is not what I wanted to do. All right. Okay, can you guys see the little blue screen?
Yes.
All right. So it's great to see everybody. Really want to have a quick conversation about governance. I'm not going to go through, I know you guys are super familiar with kind of how we got to where we are and kind of where we are. But I think, part of the conversation that I want to talk about governance is kind of where we are in comparison to some of our sister cities that have also moved to full mayoral control. And so when we moved to mayoral control, all of our ed stuff went into this structure right here. Everything that was kind of housed in the school board, everything that was known for, since home rule essentially, moved into this space here. And what that meant is that everything that's kind of related to education falls into one of these things that are either highlighted or starred. And so that's where parents, and families and school leaders and kind of everyone has to kind of navigate now. That's our current reality of where our school functions are, where our nurses are, where our construction for new buildings or modernization lives, where, student safety stuff lives, everything that is, essentially needed for a school building that's not, teacher related or, teaching or instructional staff related lives in one of these other spaces in our government because of our shift to a strong mayoral system, executive system. And that's really to say that it's, that shift to that strong mayoral system is not, kind of unique. It's very unique that it's, really much a reflection of a shift to, DCPS being under mayoral control. And even though the mayor has a lot of leeway and is able to, set the budgets and, moving things forward. And we generally, most of our charter LEAs play nice and, follow suit or very slightly from the norm. There's still a lot of that variation still causes a lot of concern for parents. Parents, for the most part, in families, as you guys know, aren't really concerned on whether a school is a DCPS school or a PCS school. They're really much concerned on how their students are learning in those environments and what they are feeling in those, what they are feeling and experiencing in those settings. And so when those expectations aren't necessarily met, that's when we get into the confusion where folks are starting to go through our systems, trying to find answers and trying to navigate this space, looking for solutions to make that classroom experience better. As we look at kind of that overview where, I guess in early 2000s, where we had a lot of shifting to strong control systems, we really see, there weren't a lot of cities that were doing it. The folks that were doing it were cities that were like DC, were for sometimes had some struggles with getting some things right. And so there was a larger shift with just doing a huge overhaul. And unfortunately, the places that kind of agreed to this huge overhaul or, bought into the huge overhaul were strong executive, were cities that for the most part where they're serving Black and brown students. And so the majority of the cities that are on this list are also cities that are serving students in families that are majority Black and brown. When you look at other states and you look at other large urban districts, or other large school districts, when they were having overhauls or shifts or reorganization of their governance, they didn't move to a strong executive. But as we're talking about this strong executive, the movement that happened in the early aughts, what we see now is a little bit of a reckoning. And so when New York, Chicago, and Boston are currently going through a reorganization or reevaluation of their mayoral system. Actually, Chicago has already moved away from their strong executive system and are reverting back to a traditional school board. Chicago, I believe, in 2027 is when they'll have fully elected school district members representing their governance structure. And so they're going to 20 districts and one at large, which will be the president of the school board, which will be fully elected. And those districts will be ran along the same lines of state representative districts, which is opposed to the nine or so school board members now that are in Chicago that are mayoral appointees. I'm sorry, chat, see there's something in the chat.
Sorry, that's me. I was sharing that before I muted myself, not burning you out with my coughing. I probably should have said that I asked Dan to share trends he's seeing from families and how they're interacting with our current system, which of course requires a bit of an overview, some common points of confusion, challenges, and any recommendations you have for improvement. And then I asked them to blame my cloudiness of my brain on the Dayquil. So I realized I did not actually tee up what we were covering today. My apologies.
But with that, New York is also in the same, is currently going through that conversation around with their New York City, in particular, what's happening with their mayoral system. The governor recently passed a budget, or really recently submitted a budget to their state house that would extended their mayoral control system for another 4 years. Their state house, their state house, essentially paused that. They moved the budget forward without funding that, creating an inflection point for them to make a decision by June 30th of whether or not they're going to extend mayoral control as a yes or no, how long they're going to extend it, and if they don't extend it, how they're going to replace it or what they want to replace it with. I'm not sure they'll be able to have an answer for that by June 30th, but they are having that strong conversation now. Boston is in a little bit of a different space. Boston, they are also having the conversation around moving away from mayoral control, but they're also in the position of having the Massachusetts State Board, their state education agency, of trying to take over that school system. And so there's pressure. I guess the reason why I picked Boston, Chicago, and New York to kind of, to discuss a little bit is because they're all cities that are similar to DC, where there are strong charter sectors and school choice existing as well, and they're all states that they're all school districts that, similar to when we moved to mayoral control, are also having conversations about what governance should look like moving forward. So part of our problem right now that what parents see a lot of, and kind of what's challenging for us, is that we have a system where our state education agency, OSSI, as well as our current structure with the DME, are really places where there should be kind of strong convening points places where both sectors should exist and kind of get direction and kind of build, both coalesce and kind of be able to move forward. Unfortunately, we have that at a very high level, but we don't have that in a very practical sense. And so we don't have a place where, outside of attendance, discipline, and graduation standards and special ed standards and federal special ed legislation, where we're able to have apples to apples across school boards. And so what parents are expecting, and what gets confusing for parents, is when they're leaving schools or trying to find schools that work for them and exercising their rights through school choice, that their expectations don't meet the expectations of their new school buildings. And so when we take a look at just general practices that, unfortunately, occur for some families, we don't really see that moving forward. And so I think in particular, one of these things that is kind of true, that is needed, is around our English language learning students. And so each school, especially for students that are recently new immigrants, recently new arrivals to the States, depending on where they enroll, they're going to have their transcripts from their home country evaluated totally different. Each school, each LEA will evaluate that transcript to the best of its ability and give credits, as needed. Some LEAs will provide proficiency testing, which will allow those students to get testing to be able to kind of test out of some subjects and get credits for that as mastery. Other LEAs don't have those policies or don't adopt that policies. Some LEAs will, for older students, will put those students on GED tracks and not diploma tracks. But there's just a lot of difference. There's a lot of difference that occur between LEAs on how we do that. And that's something that can be done if there was a stronger kind of convener, a stronger state education agency. Other points of, I think when we talk about the confusion in governance, when we talk about for families and for students, one of the things that we constantly see, day in and day out, has been around attendance, and particularly how days are counted, how the 80-20 or 80-20 soon to be 60-40 rule was implemented, and how those things are moving forward. Families, as all of you guys probably got letters from the pandemic around missed school days and missed days, and just high number of truancies or missed classes, have a need for a uniform approach on kind of what are the practices for the school building, what are going to be true kind of day in and day out. And so right now we don't necessarily have guidance that says these are the things that are going to be true for all school buildings, regardless of sector, regardless of whatever administration. We don't have something that's kind of true for all of our school buildings. And so I think as we think about governance, as we're thinking about kind of what's practical for families, we really need to focus on how do we make governance that is focusing on creating strong systems that will talk to each other regardless of sector, regardless of sector, and regardless of kind of where they are in the process. I think that's kind of where I think I got what I was. I hope I got to where you were trying to get to, Ebony. I can get more into the governance structure, but I think this was a good place for kind of all of us to have that conversation.
Thanks, Dan. I mean, so I want to open it up kind of for conversation. I think what I heard you say is there are some places like parents have expectations that certain things will be the same no matter what the sector is. And would you say it's fair that those are the places where people have brought confusion to you, whether that's like the things around English language learners that you mentioned? You mentioned a couple things, but I want to make sure that they're that I'm understanding what you're saying families are raising.
So, I was mentioned, I mentioned expectations, but I think the expectations in a much more practical sense is how our school systems are managing essentially student data and kind of how those systems talk to one another. I think families have an expectation that when I enroll into a school building, that whatever was true at the old school building will be true at this new school building. And I think there's definitely a benefit for all of our different schools have, and as they bring their climate and culture. But I think there needs to be some baselining, essentially around student information systems, some baselining around how we put data out there, collect data from families, and also some baselining around how courses and credits are operationalized in school buildings. And so I think, I know OSSE is, part of some of, I think OSSE has been moving forward with some of these things as far as kind of trying to build out shared student information systems. They have been trying to build out, I know they're going to be building out a shared kind of master course catalog for all schools, so schools will be able to have a much more easier time evaluating transcripts from students that are transient and shifting from school building to school building. But those are things that we're building out now, and it won't be ready for students and families now.
Okay. Do other members have questions?
I kind of typed them in, this is what I did, Representative. I kind of typed them in, but I agree with you, Dan, that if we're looking at systems to be responsive to parents and everything like that, then I think that has to rely with OSSE. I mean, there are things that you possibly could do to reorganize that so that groups that come to us also are responsive to OSSE or someone in that sense, whether that's DGS or something like that. There has to be some type of line where we can be responsive to parents as they come to us with complaints or whatever the case may be, or with data that's shared between schools and sectors. But there would have to be a reorganization in who responds to who. Because right now with DME, all the groups that you listed that were highlighted, they all have different bosses. So they feel like, well, I ain't got to respond as much, or I have to put as much urgency on something. And that's where it seems like a lot of the breakdown comes for parents and stuff like that, because they think we can solve their problems when actually none of the system talks to each other.
Correct. And I think, I'm sorry, I should explain this chart a little bit. So the current slide that's up here is kind of the breakdown of the education government structure, with the solid lines representing direct reports and the dotted lines representing agencies that are independent but have strong relations with those sectors. And the Public Charter School Board is a slightly different color green because it is a quasi-governmental entity. That helps.
Berg, I know you were trying to jump in.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask, and maybe, I'm sorry, I was in the car, I gave up, I came home. If I missed it, I missed it, and I can catch up with Dan afterwards. But what I wanted to find out was, you're in touch with families in a way that we're not. And I'd like to understand what people come to you with, and that you see that these are sort of the ways in which this system isn't responsive. It's just not set up to be responsive. I mean, the two that come immediately to mind is, repairs. I mean, it's endless. People ask for them 10 times, 20 times. It does not, never gets done. And there's sort of nobody who's elected who has any responsibility for it. I guess theoretically, maybe the mayor, but she's not someone you can go to and say this to. Another is sort of the opening and closing of new schools is something, they open up and nobody really has a voice on it. They close, nobody has a voice on it. And I'm sure there's a list of 10 things, but I'm curious how you hear that, sort of what kinds of issues seem to be not subject to the responsiveness that you and families would like to see.
Yeah, I think, I think you can go to every school building. Every school building will point out something that is different as far as what they're asking for and what they're not able to get. I think school buildings and kind of the modernization and repairs is something that's is kind of one of the hot topics right now. I think DG, as we've come from the pandemic and returning to schools, DGS has the responsibility of maintaining all of DCPS buildings, and government-owned buildings. And so, that it's well known that their backlog hasn't moved fast enough. And so that is something that, again, is an issue that would have been brought to the old school board, but under our current structure, is essentially brought to the mayor and to the executive. How there's accountability for that is in and of its, how accountability for that lies within the council, but it also lies, kind of within families. And I think part of what makes our switch in government to a strong school, or a switch in governance, as well as our switch to a strong school choice, kind of creates a false dichotomy for families, because families are now in a position of making decisions on school choice in school buildings, not on learning, not on instruction, but on facilities. And that is, facilities is something that should be, a baseline feature that, all students should be learning in high quality facilities. See on the other hand, Zach and John.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I have a few questions. Well, one, just thinking about the other cities that you named, are there any preliminary lessons learned in the transition that they're making? And then another question I have is, it's kind of a statement / question. I often hear that part of the issue that folk, namely in the charter sector, have, or concerns raised, really is like this lack of, for the lack of a better word, vision, coordination, collaboration, whatever you want to call it, from the deputy mayor's office, or at least someone at that tier that, in theory, in our current structure should have taking the lead on some of this. And the question there is, I know there have been efforts in the past to kind of address some of the concerns and those tensions and pain points that you flagged. Like, what lessons learned can we glean from that moving forward outside of like a major overhaul of our system? And so I guess lessons learned from other cities that you referenced, Chicago, Boston, but also lessons learned from efforts in the past to have like cross-sector collaboration that we can take forward moving.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that, kind of as you look at kind of some of the other models, Chicago, Boston, New York, they are, all of those cities have structures beyond the city itself. DC, we're pretty unique that we are a city state, that our state structures are also our local city structures. And so our movement to a strong mayoral controls, put all those state structures, whereas there's a state board or a state education agency in Massachusetts, or whereas there's a a state board and a state education agency in Illinois and in New York that can, come in and essentially say, hey, we're going to take school systems over. We're going to play the big bad boogie. We're going to set hard, standards and regulations. And it's up to you guys as the local school district to come up with it. Our state education agency reports to our executive. And so in that there is not necessarily a challenge or a fluctuation, but our executive the priorities and the prerogatives of our executive are also the priorities and the prerogatives of our state education agency. And so that creates creates some tension there where in other places in Boston and Chicago and in New York, you see a much more robust accountability structure. We don't necessarily have a system where there's going to be as robust. To the point of vision and kind of growing it, I think there's, the DME role is where it should live, and where it has lived in the past administrations where there's been a DME, Deputy Mayor for Education. I think I'm not sure we have. I'm not sure we have a system in place that allows for all of our strong entities, be it DCPS, be it DME, or State Education Agency, OSSE, which also carries out a lot of our state former local school board functions, to have that right balance. And I think there's a tension there that needs a policy solution to say, this is what this can look like, and this is how this should be. Right now, we have multiple things moving without necessarily a hard guardrail.
No, thank you for that. Just very quick follow-up on that vision piece. Like, I know from like the cross-sector task force and other just micro efforts, I think of like the pandemic and when the city announced that schools were closing, but what really was announced is that DCPS was closing. And then we saw citywide that charters were kind of scrambling to kind of meet that moment, in part because there wasn't a shared vision or collaboration ahead of time. And I just wonder, like, outside of the overhaul, if there was something that maybe could be gleaned from that or previous conversations like the task force that could just safeguard us to have those continuities across sectors. But no, thank you for that, Dan.
No, and I think you're right. I think the pandemic was definitely a time where we saw some vision, and we saw definitely a coming together of folks in the charter sector as well as DCPS coming together to try to make things work. I'm thinking particularly around kind of mail distribution and food delivery. I think there were things that that can be learned and gleaned from that and carry on and carried further. But that is the powers that be need to continue on that path. I think. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say Rep. Patterson. I thought you were finished. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was going to wait, Dan. You good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for that, Dan. One thing, as I look at our governance structure, I look at it in two phases as a system of what's going to be our long-term suggestions, because mayoral control is such a hot topic with people with various views. And I think people are coming to us currently, I think you guys would agree with me, they want kind of responsiveness now. And one thing that keeps coming through my mind, having served as an ANC, and I know you can appreciate this too, Madam Vice President, is that the one thing, and I feel like actually that our state board of representatives are actually below ANCs, because one thing that they have, which I think we should have, is great weight. That great weight, that stature changes all the dynamics of how people have to respond to ANCs and to their community and be responsive to them. And in the same way, you know, it allows us to be a lot more responsive. And I think on a short-term kind of request that we should consider, like saying that state board representatives as education matters should have great weight. That just like we have ANC meetings and Representative Thompson, you've been through these when you're debating a lot of things and people in an ANC meeting, they're going through that whole process of saying, are we going to support this project or we're not going to support this project? We kind of lean toward where the SMD, where it's happening. If we had something that was statutory like great weight, it doesn't change mayoral control, so to speak, but it is something that is stature-wise that says, okay, all things being considered, this is where the state board weighs into these issues that are being debated currently. And it's just a thought process, because I know mayoral control is going to be something that's going to be debated throughout this election. And even if there's a change in mayors and those type of things, it still would be a long time before we would actually be able to institute or repeal mayoral control. So giving us some type of statutory weight, so to speak, that would put us at least on the same par as an ANC to say, okay, these are the things that the state board hears from their constituents, who they represent. This is where we voted to support this particular issue, this particular budget, whatever the case may be. And that being given statutory great weight, I think that's something that we should consider asking for. And I think people would understand it. I think it's a great compromise as people debate what's going to happen with mayoral control.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, great weight's an interesting concept, right? And so I appreciate you putting on your former ANC hat. I would say, as a former ANC, I know that can be traumatic at times, but
definitely.
Great, yeah, and I think it's important we define great weight from people. So the power of great weight is saying, if we weigh in as an advisory neighborhood commission and say this is our where we land, if anyone in government decides anything different, they have to respond back to us with a rationale for why they disagree.
Exactly.
They can't just dismiss it.
Exactly.
Which opens up a mechanism for accountability and why residents weren't listened to. So I do think that's an interesting concept. I will say that I lost track of the hands because nobody put their hands down.
I think Ruth is next, Madam.
I did put my hand down and I put it up again. But I certainly can understand how that would be hard to track because it may not have been down for long.
No worries. Go ahead.
Okay, so to me, so first of all, I very much agree that doing a great weight thing would be a very specific thing that we could propose. Another thing that I think would be very specific that we could propose, without changing a million things, is that we ought to be able to initiate policy in the areas in which we already have it. In other words, like on the attendance, you wouldn't have had to wait 7 years for someone to propose this while it came to the top of Aussie's box. On the accountability, we could have proposed it. We could have started the social studies standards, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's another one that's pretty easy that would go a long way. So I'd put that in there. Now, but I wanted to come back to what I think Dan was saying in terms of comparing us to other places that have mayoral control. And as I understood it, part one is since we don't have a state over us, we don't have the kind of checks and balances that other places have. And that has led to particular problems. And I think for our report, that's part of what we should say. What are the checks and balances? What is the problem with that? And say it and explain that is different from every other place. I think that's a really good point. My question to Dan is, so beyond the checks and balances piece where we're different from others, how would you make the comparison in terms of what works for us or works better for us, worse for others, or vice versa?
So I think that's a little bit of the rub here, where what works better for us. As we take a look at kind of just overall improvement numbers, as far as testing, it's there's the effort to move from it to get the result that we have currently now is not is negligible. We're several points ahead, but is everyone actually feeling it? That's a conversation for another day. When I think about where we are as far as just as a city, now looking at the other places and kind of looking at our structures that exist now, things that could be adapted or things that could improve our current structure. It may be, and one of the things that always comes to mind is the way the OCFO works, as far as things and as how the OCFO works as far as a checks and balance on how we move our budget forward, how we spend our money, and if we had an SBOE or an OSCE that had a similar kind of preemptive authority to say, okay, on all educational decisions or educational policy making, where to say, all right, does this pass muster? Is this where we want it to go? Is this going to be kind of similar to a great weight conversation? But I think that would be something that could keep us moving forward in the momentum that has been built.
But wait, I want to make sure I understand this, because I'm trying to make a list of what are some of the things that we could do. So are you saying that there's some role for an OCFO that we should
no, so
consider?
not a role, so not OCFO as the OCFO stepping in, but the OCFO structure and how the OCFO is part of all of our decisions, as far as council decisions, as far as spending decisions. The OCFO, is very much is programmatically part of the process.
And is that something we should make better, or it's good? That's what I'm just trying to understand.
No. So what I'm saying, there could be space similarly for SBOE to play an OCFO role, or also to play an OCFF role for educational decisions. And so, if the end of the day is creating more uniformity in kind of all of our school practices, or creating a backstop where creating essentially a backstop for parents that creates, oranges to oranges and apples to apples for both our sectors and for all students. I think that is where we want out of our governance. That is what we want to see. We want students and families, regardless of where they choose to go to school, to be able to walk away with processes that are clear. Like, my processes for appealing a detention are very similar to the processes, or processes appealing for detention or processes appealing an expulsion are true regardless. I know that regardless of where I'm at, I know I need to go through my principal, my local, whatever my LEA processes, and then going through whatever due process rights that are afforded me through the city. That's essentially what we want for students and families as we think of governance, is that there are straight line processes that are true regardless.
So I just want to say two things, and then I'll shut down for now. It would be great, I think, to have a list of those kinds of things that we think should be common across sectors. I'm not actually sure that we would all agree on these two, but we should have a list, I think, of things that should be common that aren't, and as a result are confusing or unfair. The second thing I just want to raise is, I think about maybe half of the original mayoral control cities, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, have gotten rid of mayoral control or are getting rid of mayoral control. And I think it would be great if, if the staff or whoever could sort of be in touch with some of the folks in those places about what in particular didn't work. And was there something that could have worked that wouldn't have required the shift back to away from mayoral control? In other words, there's a set of problems. And I hear Jacques, what he's saying is, we're not going to get rid of this soon. I may be more optimistic, maybe not, but we should understand what the issues are. And if we can solve them sooner, let's do it. But those are real life situations. I mean, there's probably half a dozen cities that are, that are giving up on it. We should understand that. And so should the rest of the city. It should be part of our report.
All right, I noted, I'm gonna note two things. One, we asked Dan for 30 minutes of his time, and it is now 3:48. So we have gone beyond that. I want to check and see if there are any final questions, like absolutely burning questions, because we know how to get to Dan if we need to get to Dan, and he tends to be gracious in responding to us. If not, then I want to ask Dan if he has any like closing thoughts, and then I want to shift us to make sure we have time to finish our budget work plan conversation, and then talk about establishing some metrics for engagement, because that's where we are in our work plan. So Dan, any closing thoughts for us?
I'm always, geared up to talk, governance here, governance in other places. So just reach out. I'm glad to continue talking about it.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for putting this together for us. And we will definitely be following up with you just to continue to understand how families are experiencing what's happening with our governance system. So thank you.
Thank you guys. You guys have a great one.
You're welcome to stick around or to, run out if you want to. All right, so we have two more agenda items. So one, in preparation for our next working session, we are supposed to finalize any recommendations we have as a committee around, excuse me, this is why I've been on mute, to finalize any recommendations we have as a committee around any adjustments to our budget. I shared an email following our admin committee meeting, which I think captured many of the things at our last working session that we agreed on as best practices, such as identifying things that actually would hit in the upcoming fiscal year. So that's anything after October 1 that requires money. Providing just more detail around estimates. So for example, there might be things that it's not a either we do it or we don't. There might be a cheaper way or an efficiency that we can identify across committees. And then third, just providing kind of high and low estimates. Darren, I'm actually not, I think I can share my screen, but I'm going to pull up our, sorry, y'all, my brain is not the best. I'm going to pull up our work plan so we can see where we put in costs, and then just open that back up for discussion. Give me 1 second. And while I'm doing that, are there any questions around like what I just said or the email that was sent?
So can you, I think my answer is no, and that I read it. Can you put the email in the chat so we have it, or what, did it come with the agenda?
I don't know if I can do both. It did not come with the agenda. So it would have been an email to all committees that I sent. following the admin committee meeting about budget guidance. I'm gonna pull up.
Oh, not about, I'm sorry, not about this. Not
about us
sorry.
specific.
No, that's fine. No, I saw that.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Give me 1 second. All right, my SharePoint is not loading super quickly.
Would you like me to share it?
Yeah, Darren, if you could, that would be awesome, so I can stop wasting our time.
Okay. And this is the master work plan, or do you want?
Yeah, the master one would be great.
Okay, sharing it in just a moment. Can you all see this?
Yes. Okay. So we have a couple places where we have requests for dollars. So the first is actually around community meetings. We talked about two things. So one, the high low on this low could be 0. If we decided, and then this is a question for the committee, that the best way to do this was for members, to go out and engage. So like at existing community meetings. So if members we would give them the slides, we would prep people with the talking points. You could go to your local education council meeting, ANC, civic, PTA, do engagement. The cost would be 0. The only way we would need money for this is if we decided we would have a specific engagement around governance. And then of course, we would do, the things we always do as far as providing refreshments and like those types of costs. So I want to ask the committee for their thoughts on this. Now, the assumption is that we would do this in May and June based on our work plan. The other assumption that's built in is that Caitlin is going to adjust the slides, which she has agreed to do, that we use for our fall engagements, because we're asking similar questions, and we're really expanding on that conversation and inviting more voices in. So that's what will be needed to prepare for this. So that's the first place that we have asked for money. The second ask for money is around a community survey. This was brought up after we had the conversation around, are there other ways to reach more people outside of our state board meetings? Things like the fall engagements that we're doing. Would it make sense to expand and do a survey? Of course, there will be a dollar amount for this. And then a subsequent round of community meetings. I would say that this second round of community meetings would fall into the future fiscal year. So that's something we cannot consider as far as a request now. I do want to flag that because right now it is planned for, that will be October. And so that's something we could cut, but the other 2 items would be up for discussion for this current fiscal year. So I'll stop talking.
So the 2 items we're discussing are whether to have the community meetings in a way that is no cost because we're running them. And second is about the community survey. Is that correct?
Correct. So no cost would be for members to commit to, be the facilitators, go out, do the outreach in their wards. I will say that I think this is particularly important, that it's clear that there is an expectation for members to do this. And it will probably feed into our subsequent conversation around like, what is enough engagement, right? Like how many people are we trying to hear from? But it is a good way, I think, to help go beyond people that will naturally just show up to state board events.
So, okay, I'll weigh in. I mean, I think that would be great. I think it would be great to have local meetings. I would love to do it with my local group. The one thing I partly hear that what you're saying is that we would be using basically the outline from the fall, maybe a little updated. I would just say insofar as we have any more facts to add to the mix, that would be good. But if we're redoing the fall plus, that's okay too. But I think that's the way to do it. On the survey, I think it would be great if the board did a survey and there could be 2 or 3 or 4 questions in there about the issues that we're concerned with, and that we should think about, such questions. I mean, if it were parents, we could ask them, on which of these issues, do you feel there's a need for more responsiveness? That's probably not the best way to ask it, but sort of give them some, get some sense from people. How responsive is your school on these issues? So we get a sense of what is a problem, what isn't a problem. I think that would be great. And, how much, yeah.
Other thoughts?
I would just echo that. I think leading it with community-based groups makes a lot of sense to me too.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that being our recommendation, that we have members lead this with community-based groups. As far as the survey, I do think we have not yet talked about all that we want to capture in that. There is I think an assumption built in that these things are building on each other. And I will say, Rep. Wattenberg, I've heard you talk about like the multiple issues question. I think that is actually going to be something for the full board to consider, because one of the things that we're doing or we're hoping to do is looking across like this question of efficiency. So like, are there places where in multiple work plans we can do engagement at the same time? Or are there places in multiple work plans where we can run a survey at the same time? I don't know the answer to that looking at this, like looking at our committee work plan by itself. But I'm struggling to say. I think that is a conversation we'll be having kind of the whole, it's a whole board level conversation, but we can definitely note it.
I mean, that's fine. I just think it would be helpful to us as a committee and to the board as a whole if different groups had some ideas for questions that would make sense with them. But if we do that individually and bring it to the board as opposed to through committee, that's fine with me too.
Okay. I expected this would be a rather quick part of our meeting because it's straightforward and which would get us back on track. We're now at 4:00. And I should acknowledge the last item on here with dollars is actually all the way out into the subsequent fiscal year, which is like comms and advocacy. So that will be printing. That also would not be part of our budget request. So I'm going to transition us to our final part of the agenda. As you can see on the work plan, we are at the point where we said we were going to develop and decide on some metrics for engagement. So a little bit of context to what I'm asking for. So one of the things that we are assuming is that we want to get feedback around what goes in the recommendations. We have given thought as a board to things like our equity framework, as far as who we engage, making sure we reach out to diverse voices that don't always come to the board. And we want to make sure that we are getting what we consider a representative sample. And so we thought it might be best to decide up front what's good as far as engagement. Like, let's start to talk about how many people are we trying to reach? Are there specific populations that we think we might be difficult to reach, but are really important that we hear their voices? Are there places that we feel we might need to put, some additional, lean in a little bit more to make sure we get to those people? And so I want to open up that conversation to say, like, what is the number? Like, and that way we also on the back end don't get into a place where we're saying, you know what, let's add another series. Excuse me. Let's add another series of meetings on because we want to hear more from people. We have already decided, or let's scrap this because we've heard from enough people. We want to be intentional in deciding what success looks like and what we're working towards up front. And so I'm curious if members have thoughts around what is enough. Like, as we engage, how many people are we trying to reach through this process?
No, I appreciate this question, and it's something we've talked about for years. One thing I would flag is perhaps the idea of doing a survey at the end of the engagement and having a metric around first-time engagement with the state board. And I'm thinking about the folk that normally don't come testify, the people that are not advocates, the grandmother that is the caretaker for her grandkids, or just parents that are usually not engaged. And I think that would be a helpful metric if it's, although it's not a perfect one, it could be one that just shows that we're reaching beyond our typical audience. And on that survey, we can have other questions if we want to do demographics, age, breakdown, et cetera.
I would be curious. So like, here's what I know. I know that in the fall engagements, we had about 50 people participate in those sessions. What I don't know is if that is like good or if that's like average for turnout for meetings. And I guess maybe some of this might be a question for staff on the back end. I also don't have a sense of how many people we've engaged when it comes to other processes. My assumption is that if we know that, I don't know, DTPS serves or we have about 100,000 school-age kids in the city, I'm not saying we need to get to 100,000 people, but like, would our goal be through this process, we engage some percentage of those families? Like, what is, or have we not had goals like that in the past?
It is not my understanding we've had goals, but I don't, at least in my time, we may have done that before. I could see the benefit of doing that type of breakdown by ward too. And so less about maybe 50 or 75 people, but perhaps we set a goal per ward to just make sure we are both hitting that number, but also ensuring it's representative of the city. And we know we've had struggles in the past, just equitably engaging folk, namely east of the river.
And sorry, my last question, and I see Representative Wattenberg is trying to jump in. Does anyone have a guess or a sense as far as like our most recent, so like when we think about the STAR framework engagements, do we have a sense of how many individuals like responded, like attended, like showed up at engagements and or were captured in the surveys? I'm sure we know that information, but like if we had to guess.
So, I mean, I think, and this is partly responsive to your immediate question, I think there's two issues. One is, how do you get some understanding of the views of our city in a representative way? The way you do that is through a pollster. They know how to do that. And that's why I think it is really important for us to do one of these surveys. We did one, I think, on the teacher turnover, and we did it in a way that, basically you could say this reflects our teacher community because that's how it was set up. And we could do the same thing for a parent community. But that's, to me, the only way you get something that's, quote, representative. Anything else is different. But I also think there's a huge need, and it's important as well to just have engagement because that's what we do. And the more people that understand, the better. And I think the thing there is to ask everybody to do the basics, but then have a real plan backed up by staff to reach out where we know that's an issue. And as I put in the chat, for example, I think what Empower Red did with these QR codes, and they went out into the community and they got hundreds of responses by going to, I can't remember, to libraries or wherever they went. And that was even during the pandemic. So it would be easier now. But to go out, use this very simple QR code, people answer 5 questions. And it's an opportunity to hear their voices, but also to talk to them. So I would really recommend something like that, and targeting, whether it's rec centers or it's libraries or, Alistair's, the laundromats, but to really identify places where we can go and reach people where they are. But I would just think of these as 2 different things. One is we want to understand where people are citywide, representatively, and we want to engage. And the first we do through, through survey research, and the second we do through getting on the ground in our own wards in our own ways, but also through some special investments out of the board. And to your last question, Ebony Rose, about the STAR, I think the thing on the STAR is it's been going on for so long. And so over a period of time, there's hundreds of people who have testified. I don't know that we've ever looked to see like what wards they're from. We could do that, I suppose. I don't know that it's worth it, but we could. And then, so that's sort of what I think is, and over time, again, this has been going on for a number of years. Every ward council has discussed it at least once, probably more. And there've been these ward meetings. So I don't know if that helps answer that question.
I think that's useful information. I'm not sure it answers my question. I do think it informs it though. So what I think the question I'm trying to get at, and maybe it is, maybe it might be helpful just to gather this information and make a recommendation to the committee, is like, not how do we reach people, but how many people are we trying to reach, and who are they? So I know Darren is going to be meeting with the Office of Racial Equity to start to talk about the equity audit tool. He is willing to raise to them this question of like what it looks like to be representative for the city, number of survey respondents, folks by ward, that type of thing. And so we can bring that back. I also am just curious about, again, like, is our goal for the survey, we want to get 1,500 responses from families, or is it, and that way we can make some informed decisions about how long we need to run a survey, or how many meetings we need to have, or like, are we on track or off track as far as starting to do outreach and how much time it takes. And so I think this is a helpful conversation, and it's probably going to, I'm realizing it's probably going to take some homework and possibly, and I'm going to ask if the best, maybe a way forward before we start to get into the strategy of how we get it done is actually maybe for Darren and I to go back, ask some of these questions, share some of what has been true in the past, and then kind of start to agree on some goals from there. I don't know if that's making sense. And again, I am a bit influenced by Dayquil today, so there's that.
No, that does make sense. I would just say that to your original question, I do think our engagements this last year were on par with the engagement, at least that I saw in late 2018. That was the STAR engagement. It was at Walker Jones, if I remember. And there were about, and I'm sure staff can confirm this, but I want to say there were about 50 people or so there. And then we obviously have the numbers for surveys. A survey I did in Ward 5 alone got like 200, close to 300 responses. And so if we just multiplied that by all the wards, maybe those could just be some helpful metrics. But yes, I think using staff to kind of triage and figure out what makes sense based on past performance makes sense.
Okay, that's helpful. This has all been helpful because I didn't want to assume. Like I can't, and I will say, I know we, even things like board councils or ANC meetings or civic associations, I know we kind of say those things as if it's all the same, and it's not all the same. So like I've been to some meetings where there's a bunch of people. I've been to some where they're not, like they all have like different structures and kind of pull on different people. And I'm really excited about us thinking more on like who we're engaging, how we're engaging, and just like building on what we've done so far. So I appreciate the discussion and the feedback. Darren and I have some homework. If there are examples that, and I know a couple have come up in this conversation that you want to make sure are like reflected in that or are good for us to take a look at in the interim, please shoot them our way, and we'll come back to the committee with something to respond to as far as our engagement goals.
And can I assume that if it's in the chat, it's been submitted in effect? I don't need to redo that.
We can export the chat.
If I can copy them all. That's what.
Yeah, we can export the chat. Darren is taking notes.
Yes, I can export the chat as well.
Okay. All right.
I'll share that after this meeting, and then tomorrow I should be getting the committee minutes out to you all.
All right. Those are our 3 agenda items for today. I don't know if there's anything that we didn't capture. The only other thing is I know we have talked about moving our standing meeting date. So it currently, or most recently was Friday, I think the second Friday at 1:00. I know everybody is busy and we have competing schedules. I do want to, before sending out another doodle poll, I just ask and kind of get a sense of best days and times as far as time of the month, days of the week, and times of day, so that we can get back to a regular meeting cadence. Sorry, Bert Wattenberg, did you raise your hand?
So the one piece of new business I just wanted to raise was we've talked in the past about other speakers to have. So I did want to suggest people who could come speak. Because one thing I feel like is I really want to hear from people who have experience sort of really looking at how governance did and didn't change things and what was lost and not lost, if that's sort of what they do. And just here, we've heard some great stuff from people who are experiencing it here, but I'd love to hear from someone like that. And the person I know that I would recommend is Jeff Hennig, who did a book about this, and he actually a couple probably, and he knows DC. He used to be in DC. Another is Clarence Stone, who has written about this and actually used to be, I think, a big supporter of mayoral control, who has gone through something of a rethinking since watching it. So I think that could be interesting. So those I'll stick them in.
So I know that based on our work plan next month, we're supposed to have that kind of meeting you're talking about. One of my hesitancies is I want to make sure I have a date.
No, that's fair. I just want to make sure that.
So yes, I think we're thinking similarly, and we've captured a couple of those recommendations. So, yeah. So I will say for me, afternoons tend to be trickier because in my professional life, a good chunk of the team I work with is on the West Coast. So a lot of my team meetings and things tend to be in the afternoon. if possible, morning meetings, and I cringe when I say this, are a bit better. I would say Fridays tend to be better for me. And now I think we're going to have, I think I have a Thursday meeting block or meeting window that I can schedule in. I don't know if others have preferences, but I'm hoping to kind of capture people's preferences so we can send out a date. I would also prefer we don't meet too close to our meetings, like our public meetings. Do you know what I mean? All right, I see some stuff from Ruth in the chat. Thank you.
Can I just say, I missed a word says, but those first three bad for me. Those are my absolute worst, absolute no's. And then Tuesday night's also not good. Okay.
Okay, so nights. When you say nights, now let's assume we're not going to meet after 5 for the committee.
Then what's, if we're not meeting after 5, my real problems are really just, my always problems are Wednesday afternoons and Fridays before 10. There's other things, but you know, they come and go and I can typically schedule around them. But those are my, I can't.
So I'm going to say, I'm make sure I'm saying it back right. Wednesday afternoons are a trouble spot. Fridays before 10 are a trouble spot.
Yep.
Got it. Representative Parker.
There isn't a set date that doesn't work, but yeah, so I'm pretty flexible as long as I have a advance notice.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask this question. Fridays at 1, that was bad because what?
I just put that in. That was me. It's not, I just don't, it's not a deal breaker if that's the one that works for everybody.
Okay.
It's just, especially with summer coming, people leave, people, you know, things happen. So it's not my preference, but it's not hard like these other ones.
Okay. Oh, Rep Patterson is back. Okay, so Rep Patterson, you came back at a perfect. I have an echo.
Hello,
you came back at a perfect time.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know why there's an echo. But are there days and times that are better for you or worse for you, like deal breakers for you, as far as a standing committee meeting?
I'm sorry there's an echo if it's me, but I'm in agreement with Representative Parker in the sense of, as long as I have advance notice, I'm pretty flexible as well.
Okay, I am going to take a look at Darren's notes, see if we can make a couple other suggestions outside of the Fridays at 1. And you all can let us know which one works the best. We will do our best to get as advanced a date for our next month's meeting as possible, because we also are supposed to be having a panel at that meeting to Rep Wattenberg's new business point. And we want to make sure that we have a date so we can get those invites out, since we'll have guests coming in. So we'll lock that down this week. Is there anything else?
Not from me.
Okay, awesome. I feel no need to hold us. Thank you, everybody. So I just want to repeat back our next steps. So we have some homework as far as the goals, metrics for engagement. We'll get something to you soon. Part of that is going to hinge on Darren's meeting with the Office of Racial Equity. We will. I'm also going to follow up with Caitlin about modifying the slides so the committee can see that. So we can start so we can get you all feedback as far as the community engagements. And then we will follow up about a standing meeting date and time so we can get out invites for experts for our next meeting, which means we can keep moving along. Is there anything else I missed as far as next steps? Oh, I know what the other thing was. As far as the homework for committee members, if there are particular examples of things that were done well or numbers you know about as far as how many people were reached with respective engagements, please send them our way. I think that's it. I'm going to take that silence as agreement.
Sounds good.
Hearing none, I'm going to go ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to go ahead and adjourn. You all have a wonderful afternoon.
Hi, everybody.
As well. Thank you.
Everybody.
Feel better, Ebony Rose.
Thank you.
Take care.